of course, the Communist Party has done a lot, making China, the second largest economy in the world, creating platforms for the developing world, such as Africa, to renegotiate its trade relationships with the West. But China is suffering severe problems at the moment. We've had slow growth. We've got the threat of potential unrest. What is the big challenge for the incoming, Chinese elite as Hu Jintao steps down?
Well, I think you said it. China needs to maintain economic growth. I think to keep itself going, and this is of primary importance, no matter who's in charge. Of course, on top of that, there's also growing political scandals, which in the last, say, 15 years didn't really happen that much. The main one being Bo Xilai, who was the party governor of Chongqing, who it was revealed was involved in all sorts of corruption and improper practices. So this has been a great blemish on the party. It's also led towards calls to saying that the party might be forced to make some political reforms. So, of course, in the last 20 to 30 years, there's been great economic reforms, but politically, it's not only has it been stagnant, it's probably even gone backwards a little bit, particularly after 1989. So I think one of the central questions for Xi Jinping is what sorts of political reforms will they have to make under his leadership. And of course, this is very closely linked to the economy.
Now, of course, Sino-Africa trade is booming, even as China's overall trade growth rates continue to slow down because of weak domestic demand and overseas market. We know that it's increased by 2% over year on year to about $80.5 billion in the first 5 months of 2012. Talk to us about China's increasing role on the continent, and what does this herald, for growing African economies?
Well, China's recent, how should I say, presence in Africa, and its booming presence in Africa in the last decade or so, or even more, is inextricably linked to China's shift toward a market economy. You can't dispel those two. China and Africa had relations before that, but they were based on highly ideological socialist principles, where they aligned themselves with certain socialist governments. So there's been a massive change. Again, I mean, it's a stereotype almost, but it's true that China will continue to need Africa's resources if it wants to continue its position in the global economy as the manufacturer of the world. It's going to need more resources, and in this sense, Africa sort of serves as a frontier. We can see, for instance, in a place like East Africa, where there's suddenly opening up the East oil and gas bonanza. China is very heavily involved in this. And so I think that this trend will continue. China will continue to try and extract as many raw materials as it can from Africa, but keep in mind that it's not just China who's doing this, it's competing with all the other global players on the scene. I think one of the big problems, of course, in these sorts of relationships, and you saw this with the former colonial powers, is although the trade, if you look at the figures, they seem quite balanced. Basically, what's going out of Africa is mainly resources, and what's coming into Africa is cheap Chinese goods. So this does not necessarily, it's not beneficial to the African economy. So I think really in the next, in Xi Jinping's leadership, you will need more of a focus on transferring of skills and trying to create better manufacturing bases within Africa themselves. Because ultimately what Chinese want is stable environments in which to invest in Africa. And one of the ways in which you can do this, I think, is by trying to promote these African economies themselves. So it's a win-win situation for everybody.
Now, of course, we've had certain African countries try and recalibrate that relationship with China. President Jacob Zuma, for example, on his recent trip to China, raised the issue quite sharply, saying that we can't be in this, one-way relationship where extractive, materials go to China and very little else happen here. To what extent, in your view, is China open to that kind of changing relationship?
Well, I mean, it was good of Jacob Zuma to say that because often a lot of African presidents tend to sort of kowtow before the Chinese because they give out lots of aid, and so there's this sort of deferential relationship. So I think it's definitely good that Jacob Zuma stated this problem publicly in a public forum. However, when it comes to the reality of the situation, I mean, I can't see anything in place which is necessarily going to change this in any significant way, other than the fact that the Chinese, in terms of their aid to Africa, are quite aware of the fact that this is a problem, this sort of economic relationship, classic periphery margin relationship where they extract resources and dump their goods. Like I say, the Chinese, if they want to prove their commitment to developing the African continent and its economies, are going to have to emphasize more on transferring of resources. And I'm not sure, I mean, I recently read, there's a recent study which has shown that Chinese goods through Africa has seriously damaged South Africa's market in terms of competing within sub-Saharan Africa itself, because obviously for South Africa, sub-Saharan Africa is a potential market, and in this sense it competes against the Chinese. To what degree this is going to change in the future, I'm not sure, because really when it comes down to it, this is where the money is. And it will be interesting to see how far the Chinese are willing to go in terms of slowing down this unhealthy trade relationship. But also it'll be interesting to see in the next few years if more African leaders like Jacob Zuma sort of become more vocal and more critical about the China-Africa engagement, which I think will be welcome.
Dr. Anthony, final question. We've had the US election, the re-election of Barack Obama. We have now a change in leadership in the second largest economy of the world. And of course, those two countries also have particular tensions governing that relationship. The new incoming Chinese political elite, how do you think they're going to steer their ship in relation to Mr. Obama?
Well, obviously it's much more difficult to tell what the Chinese elites are going to do, primarily because their political system is far more secretive than the American one. So, for instance, prior to the American election, there's a priming of candidates, and they have to disclose everything from their, I don't know, their tax receipts to their personal lives. Mm-hmm. In China, there's none of that. So it's very hard to sort of ascertain what the individuals, or what sort of people they are, and what sort of policies they'll implement.